Having me along. It's nice to be invited to somewhere with people. We don't have many people in Braemar, so it's weird that people are talking. I'm used to talking to insects and things, so it's nice to have people responding. So yes, this is about restoring the Caledonian Pinewoods of Marlodge Estate. The NESBReC area is obviously hugely important, internationally important for our Caledonian Pinewoods. More of them in due course. So first of all, where are we? Well, so Marlodge Estate is basically as far west as you can go in Aberdeenshire. As of 2017, we've been a National Nature Reserve, the largest one in the UK actually. So we've got 30,000 hectares. We are right from the top of Ben Macdui, right the way round to Anscarsach and Carneela and Carnvac, all those sorts of areas. And we basically got sort of 3 or 4 main ecotone ecosystems that we're interested in. First of all, the high plateau, places like NESBReC, the Caledonian Pinewoods themselves and the associated broadleaf woodlands, and then the heather moors and the blanket bogs as well. So typical classic Scottish stuff. Owned and managed by the National Trust of Scotland since 1995. We'll get into why that's interesting. I'm sorry, we're going to be wading into the murky depths of politics at some point, which might be interesting. But we've been owned and managed by National Trust of Scotland since 1995. We have a 200-year vision to be a place which connects habitats, wildlife, and people, past, present, and future, integrating conservation, learning, recreation, field sports, and culture in one vast and diverse landscape at the heart of the national park. So we have 3 things we do: nature conservation, open access for all, and highland sport, as long as those 3 go together. And with those 3, environmental conservation holds the trump card. So environmental conservation comes first. This remarkable tree, by the way, is the Old Manamar. Annoyingly, it's only the 2nd largest pine in Scotland. There's a bigger one in Perthshire, which I might cut down. So yeah. So what do we have? I'll quickly run through this because this is a NESBReC thing, and I want you all to come out and record stuff on our estate. So we have our beautiful Caledonian Pinewoods, the subarctic plateaus, blanket bogs, very nice river systems, all the rest. And these are some of the species that are kind of interesting for us. We have recorded about 5,300 species on the estate, I think, but we're definitely missing a few. So regarding spiders, actually, so as of last year, we had 18 species of spider recorded. We had some guys do some work on a blanket bog last year, and now we have 50 species of spider recorded on the estate. So there's lots of spiders to be recorded, lots of earthworms to be recorded as well. So if there are any specialists out there, do come and visit us. This is just a nice excuse to show some nice pictures. So here's a dotterel. Probably our highest conservation concern species, actually, curlew, or one of the highest ones that we can do stuff about at Marlodge. Hen harriers, my personal favourite. Lapwing, desperately trying to find its nest. And of course, the mighty red deer. And the tiny Buxbaumia viridis. And twinflower. And ptarmigan. I just like pictures. And here's some whortle-leaf willow as well, some nice montane scrubby stuff in there. So the question I get asked most is basically, are you rewilding? What are you up to, and does it count as rewilding? So here's a picture of some lovely Areophorum, some hairstale cottongrass, which just comes alive with large heath butterflies in summer. And that's there to remind us that I'm talking about pinewoods today primarily, but we have lots of habitats that are equally important. We do talk about rewilding in what we do. I tend to say that what we do is natural processes-led landscape scale ecological restoration, which doesn't fit on a mug in the same way. But there's a beautiful Gallic term, Ducas, which is this idea of unity existing between land, people, all living creatures, nature and culture. It didn't always, I think it came out of the clan system, so that is a slightly romanticized definition of it, I think, but it's a very useful one for thinking about what we're doing at Marlodge, which is not just about nature, it's also people, nature, the interaction between those, the varied and long history, which is all very exciting and interesting. So more broadly, what we're trying to do, we're attempting to reconcile the disparate strands of the estate's nature, culture, and social history into one cohesive, nature-oriented whole. You can see that's what's going on in our management plan there. So is it rewilding? I'd say we use rewilding principles when it suits us, which is a lot of the time. But we're not dogmatic about it. So if rewilding processes aren't working for us, we wouldn't use them. We don't use them across the whole of the estate. That being said, Marlodge is interesting and worth coming to primarily because it's one of the largest areas in the country, which is where natural processes are the main driving force behind what's going on there. So it is a very interesting landscape if you're interested in ecological restoration. So change of pace. So you can't really understand Marlodge without a visit to the Stag Ballroom, which is this place here, which has 2,435 antlers knocking about. It's been a hunting estate for over 1,000 years. Malcolm Canmore was hunting stuff there back in 1050 or whenever he was about. So it's similar to places like the New Forest, I guess, in that sort of way. But it does have it has a very long human history. I mean, we've got evidence that the place has been inhabited by humans pretty much continually for 8,000 years. Funny enough, that's the same amount of time that we know the Pinewoods have existed, and also that we know that red deer have been in the area. It has a very representative history of the wider Cairngorms area. So it was settled, it was crofted, it was forested. The forests were overused from about the 17th century. There were spurts of regeneration. We know more or less that we've lost about half of our Caledonian pinewoods at Marlodge. That's since about the 1690s. Historically, there was much more woodland, and a lot of that was lost, both due to anthropogenic factors and climate change. Things got interesting in the 1780s when one of the many Earls of Fife got very into deer stalking. So Marlodge is one of the original deer stalking sporting estates. It really is prototypical of all the sporting estates and that model of land management you see across Scotland. And there is an argument to say that those sporting interests were the original rewilders. So they moved red deer about across the landscape. There was a reintroduction of capercaillie at Marlodge, which didn't go very well. There was also an introduction of wild boar, which ate all of the wood ant nests and then died. And that was the end of that. There was an attempt to there was an attempt to introduce chamois sheep at one point, but King George IV heard about it, stole them, put them in Windsor Great Park, and they all died. So we've lost a lot of woodland over that time, and basically since the 1780s there has been no natural regeneration of the pinewoods at Marlodge, which brings us to 1995 when the estate was sold to National Trust of Scotland. But that process of purchase brought together quite a few people, not least the previous landowner, a guy called John Kluge, who's an American oil tycoon, who fell out of love with Scotland for salacious reasons. But also Scottish Government, Natural Heritage Memorial Fund, Heritage Lottery Fund, and also the Easter Charitable Trust, so who put together about £4 million to help National Trust of Scotland purchase the estate, with the proviso that Highland sport continue on the estate until such a point as Highland sport is no longer legal in Scotland, I think is the actual wording. So regarding Highland sport, so we currently do a bit of walks up grouse when the grouse numbers allow. We don't particularly managed for red grouse in any meaningful way. Deer stalking still, and also salmon fishing, with a few other bits and bobs every now and then. So this is where we were at in 1995, about 1,000 hectares of semi-natural Caledonian pinewood left. And I think one of the things that I try to remind people is not just the extent of the pinewoods, it's also they were really knackered. There's very little of an understory left. The woods were hyper open, basically park woodland, not really functioning in any substantial way as a Caledonian pinewood anymore. It's also worth remembering quite how rare Caledonian pinewood is and how important it is. There's only about 18,000 hectares of it left in Scotland, and of course it's only found in Scotland. And that's not much. I think we roughly have the same amount of heather moorland at Marlodge as there is Caledonian pinewood in the whole of Scotland. So we're talking, you know, as a percentage of land cover, it's really very small. So what were we going to do about it? So the deer herd in 1992 was up to about 5,500 on the estate, way above what the woodlands could support. If you talk to some of the folk who were working on the estate in the 70s, it was possibly even higher than that back then. National Trust of Scotland sometimes I think you get the impression it's a bit of a staid organisation, a little bit stuck in its ways, quite sort of culturally conservative. But actually, the stuff that went on at Marlodge was really quite radical, quietly radical, I would say, or it tried to be quietly radical. The idea was not to use fencing to restore the pinewoods, it was to go for landscape scale ecological restoration. This was a long time before rewilding as a concept was really common currency. We were also trying to continue as a Highland sporting estate. So trying to balance those two things is always going to be interesting. And it involves thinking about new ways of working, new ways of understanding land management, I guess. Back to our friend at the Stag Ballroom. So what were we trying to do? So we had a legal obligation to continue field sports, as well as a legal obligation to bring our woodlands, and a moral obligation to bring our woodlands back into favourable condition. There's wider environmental benefits and costs to any land management that you might do. We're also dealing with clashing perceptions of the same landscape, right? So I might go out into a woods and see something quite specific. I might see some beautiful habitat for, I don't know, something or other. And someone more interested in sport shooting might go into that same woodland and see a completely different thing to what I'm seeing. There's the ethical and moral considerations of killing native species. Deer culling is always going to be controversial, whatever your land management objectives are, simply because it's high stakes, right? It involves killing things. And then there's the cultural impact of interventions. So there was a lot going on in the mix in 1995. And how did it go? Not particularly swimmingly to begin with. So the National Trust of Scotland took a lot of flack. I'm sure many people in the room will remember this and will have gone through all of it themselves. It took a long time for the Trust to work out how to manage deer to allow landscape scale woodland restoration. It's quite a difficult thing to do. And it's also very culturally sensitive. By 2008, we realized we were going to have to cull a lot of deer. By 2011, the pinewoods were still in pretty unfavorable condition. Off the back of this, we'd taken money from government, essentially from the Scottish Natural Heritage, to get those pinewoods back into good condition. And we'd also taken money to continue Highland sport. So getting this balance was a very tricky thing. I do think we've got there now. Management's an iterative process, of course, and you can't take anything for granted. But I think the main thing we learned was the importance of communication, listening to people from different backgrounds to yourself, and trying to find a way forwards, trying to find common ground. So what does that look like? Well, this is 2011. This is when the Pinewoods were in an unfavourable condition, and you can kind of see they look okay, I guess. You know, there's you can see there's a plantation in the background, but that stuff in the foreground looks like a Caledonian pinewood at the end of the day. So this photo was taken in 2011. You might just be able to pick out down by the river there. There's a few pines, young pines, beginning to knock their way through. We retook this picture in 2021, and that's what it looked like. So we need to retake it again in 26. We take them every 5 years. And this is basically what we're seeing in the landscape now. So we've removed non-natives mostly from the forestry blocks. We have removed a few vehicle tracks on the estate. The river's got more wiggly. That's not really down to us. That's more down to Storm Frank and other things. But that's been net very positive for biodiversity, I would say. And of course, the big thing is we have landscape scale woodland regeneration for the first time in 200 years. This map was done in 2011. It shows all the areas where there was young pines above the height of heather. So there's about 155 hectares of it in 2011, just beginning to sneak through. It was a little bit more actually. You can see down here. There was a wee bit that wasn't mapped. But for all intents and purposes, 155 hectares. We redid this in 2021. And so we now have about 2,000 hectares, or in 2021 anyway, we had about 2,000 hectares of regenerating pinewoods getting away. You can see the way pine works as well. It shifts its stances, right? So it likes moving into areas which are light. It likes sandy soils, it likes fairly well-drained soils. It's a pioneer species, ultimately. We've also got hundreds of hectares of woodland higher than this, higher altitude than this. So this is all very exciting. You can see part of the woodland history in this photo. This was that thing in the foreground is a pine stump that was taken out in 1942, 1943, something like that. That's how it looks in 2021. It's not just pines. It's easier to get pine away than broadleafs generally, because deer prefer eating broadleafs. But you can get broadleaf woodland away, and once it goes, it really goes. So we're seeing a lot of broadleaf woodland regeneration in areas where there is a broadleaf seed source. It likes it along the edge of rivers, and this is one of the beautiful things about landscape scale ecological restoration. Trees tend to grow where trees want to grow rather than where we think they do. It creates a much more diverse landscape, I guess. And also it's trees of local provenance. So there's all that stuff going on. More of the same. We've also, you can see we've taken out as many fences as we can. The idea is for the plantations to become more like Caledonian pinewoods, essentially. So that's the way we're managing those. This is Glenderry. So we've got a lot to think about, though. We're not entirely thinking about Caledonian pinewoods when it comes to our management. There's lots of different things to think about, but what we do know is Caledonian pinewoods are incredibly precious, incredibly biodiverse, and incredibly important. So given how knackered they were in 1995, they really have been of primary importance for us for our conservation. This was a really good paper that came out, a few years ago, which basically tells you the ethos of woodland restoration. Native reforestation of open ground offers net gains in bird species richness, but could disbenefit open ground birds, including those of conservation concern. So we're trying to balance all of those things at Marlodge, and we're very fortunate in that we have the space to do so, which is a real luxury for us. So we're as interested in our merlins and our meadow pipits as we are in our, I don't know, sparrowhawks and tree pipits. We need to think about the climate crisis, and we need to think about what our pines are going to be doing in the future. There was a paper out not so long ago that suggested that a lot of the areas of Scotland which currently have native pinewoods will no longer be climatically suitable for them fairly soon. So fortunately for us, our pines are ascending the hill. We're seeing the return of a natural pine tree line. This is up at about 650, 700 meters altitude. And it's on a very wind-blasted, very open area. So you can see pines can do quite well in these very, very, very tricky areas. And we need to think about climate resilience for a few things. I mean, you know, people get very excited about the idea of blue throats, Lapland buntings, re-establishing themselves potentially in Scotland in these montane woodland areas. Just as important for me, I think, or probably more important, is thinking of these high montane woodland areas as a refuge habitat for species that we already have. So stuff like willow warblers maybe in the future, red grouse even, ring ouzels. And just very quickly, this is kind of what we're seeing and what we're sort of aiming for in some of the higher altitude corries. This is Corrie Etchican, so the corrie of juniper, which is full of juniper, and now pine is beginning to re-establish there up to about 750 meters altitude in places. What's nice though, again thinking landscape scale, thinking natural processes, we're not seeing blanket afforestation. We're seeing a nice mix of things coming together to create a more biodiverse landscape that's more resilient in the face of the climate crisis. And this is what we expect in the future. So this is that's Hutchison's Bothy there. So that's 750 meters altitude. It's not all rosy at all because we work in nature. So climate change and continued biodiversity loss are kind of built in no matter what we do at Marlodge. We're seeing a massive loss of snow cover. I've been here 8 years. Even in that time, I've seen a massive decline. We're seeing greater wildfire risk for longer. We're also seeing more visitors, which is great because one of the things we want to do is open access for all. But more visitors also equals more disturbance, more chance of wildfire, and if you're working with a stressed population of something and a bit of disturbance is going to tip it over the edge, that's something we need to think about. So there are definitely losers in this. So dotterel, ptarmigan, possibly black grouse in the long future. But there are positives as well. So we're seeing a big increase in carbon sequestration. A lot of our work is not just in the pinewoods, but also on the peat bogs, you know, looking at things like flood prevention, water services, climate change mitigation, so on montane woodlands at high altitude, the return of lost species, and connectivity as well. So we've just finished a big project trying to link us up with Fesci, so there'll be woodland corridors as far as the eye can see in the future. And also opportunities for people in rural areas. So one of the things that's often levelled, both at the Trust and more generally at rewilding projects, is that they are essentially espousing land abandonment. There's more people working at Marlodge now than there were back in 1995, and those jobs are more diversified than they were previously. There's also more gamekeepers now than there were in the 1950s, which is interesting. So yes, key lessons. Nature is surprising. One of the lovely things about my job, so my job is monitoring all of this nonsense. It's surprising. I get surprised every day when I go out on the hill. Working with nature at a landscape scale is really good for pinewood restoration. It's not just Marlodge showing this. You know, you can name a fair few places, Cairngorms Connect, for example, in the area. doing the same things. There's lots of benefits, but it's not a silver bullet. We need to think through everything we do. There's no one thing you can do on the land that is perfect. There's always going to be trade-offs.